Serena Valen had always felt too much. As a child, she wept during thunderstorms, not out of fear, but from a strange grief that welled up inside her when lightning struck the earth. In crowded rooms, she staggered under the weight of invisible storms, flooded by emotions that didn't belong to her. Doctors prescribed silence and solitude. Her parents, unsure whether to fear or protect her, chose both. By 23, Serena lived quietly on the edge of a coastal village, earning enough as a freelance translator, her gift for languages as uncanny as her emotional intuition. She rarely left home. The sea was her only companion, its moods easier to read than people's. Everything changed the morning the sky cracked. It began with a tremor, a deep, low hum that set birds wheeling in frantic patterns above the cliffs. Then came the light, a burst of silver that fractured the clouds and stitched the sky with silent lightning. Serena stepped out barefoot onto dewy grass, shielding her eyes. The object descended slowly, too smooth and alive looking to be a machine, too calculated to be natural. It hovered above the field like a breath held too long. People gathered, half drawn by awe, half by fear. Phones clicked. Drones buzzed. Serena stood still, her chest tight. The hum was louder now, but inside her, something deeper stirred. The craft opened like an eyelid. From within, a figure stumbled, a creature small and glistening, all curves and darkness, with enormous eyes and trembling limbs. It collapsed onto the grass, and the crowd took a collective step back. Soldiers arrived soon after, pushing onlookers behind barriers. But Serena couldn't move. Her heart felt torn wide open. Panic, raw and alien, coursed through her veins as if it were her own. The creature wasn't dangerous. It was terrified. She stepped forward. A warning shout rang out, but the soldiers hesitated. Something about her expression, the utter certainty in her body, made them pause. She knelt beside the creature, hands open. "I know," she whispered, not in English, but in something older than language, a feeling given voice. The creature's shaking slowed. It looked at her with astonishment, and something passed between them, electric and clear. "You understand me." Everything after happened fast. Authorities took them both. The being, classified temporarily as Subject Xeno-1, was placed in containment. Serena was questioned for hours, her abilities dismissed at first as dramatics or delusion. But the footage told a different story. When she was near, the creature calmed. When she spoke, it responded. No translator, no neural interface, just emotion, clean and true. Soon, scientists replaced guards. Linguists, diplomats, and intelligence officers watched from behind one-way glass as Serena sat with the alien, who now called itself Alo, a name that felt like wind when spoken. Their conversations unfolded not in words, but in waves, of grief, of wonder, of loneliness. Alo's people hadn't meant to arrive on Earth. Their vessel had been thrown off course, the others lost in the storm. The world reacted as it always did, some with awe, some with fear. Nations scrambled to claim pieces of the event, but it was Serena the alien requested. Only she. Within a month, the Intergalactic Council made contact. Humanity was not alone, they said, and hadn't been for a long time. But never before had a human been able to perceive across species the way she could. It wasn't just translation. It was empathy weaponized into understanding. They offered her a choice. Leave Earth, travel to the diplomatic station in orbit, and serve as an emotional envoy between species. Or stay, knowing her gift would rot behind red tape and security clearance. Serena hesitated only once, when her father called for the first time in years to ask her not to go. "They're not our kind," he said. "You don't owe them anything." But she had already felt Alo's memories. She had seen their sunless home, the sorrow of exile, the ache of unfamiliar gravity. She boarded the ship at dawn. The sky was clear, and the clouds looked like oceans waiting to be crossed. The craft was unlike anything she'd seen. Sleek and quiet, guided more by thought than mechanics. She stood in the observation deck, a transparent platform that opened into the clouds. Alo stood beside her, joined by two other beings, slim and silver-eyed, watching her with cautious respect. "This is only the beginning," Alo said aloud for the first time, its voice shaped by exposure to her mind. There is much pain between stars, but you carry stillness. Serena didn't feel still. Her heart beat with a thunder she couldn't quiet, but she smiled, because for the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone in the storm. And somewhere, high above the world she once called home, a new chapter opened, written not in blood or conquest, but in empathy, the kind that bridged galaxies. Still, she knew peace was not easily won. The stars were full of old wounds and stranger hungers. But now she had purpose, and purpose, she realized, was its own kind of gravity. The clouds parted, the stars waited, and Serena, the girl who once wept without knowing why, stepped forward to meet them. The diplomatic station floated like a dream above the stratosphere, its hull shimmering in layers of alien alloys and organic matter, built over centuries by dozens of species who barely trusted one another. Serena walked its corridors as both anomaly and ambassador. Most beings avoided eye contact, if they had eyes, but a few watched her with a mix of awe and uncertainty. She was, after all, human, and she felt everything. It wasn't glamorous. The emotional pressure was constant. Every corridor bled the weight of centuries. Resentment simmering between species, guilt hanging in the air like smoke, fear whispering from the walls. Serena learned to anchor herself, to breathe in patterns, to distinguish her own emotions from those she absorbed. Alo stayed by her side, acting less as a guardian and more as a guide. He had traveled farther, lived longer, and more worlds than Serena could yet imagine. But even he admitted that her presence changed the cadence of diplomacy. She didn't just translate words. She detected lies without accusation, soothed tension without sedatives. Emotions revealed themselves to her like colors in the air. Her first real test came during the talks between the Growlithe and the Corwins, two species locked in bitter silence for over a century, their conflict spanning planets, poisoning trade routes, and setting back generations of progress. The Growlithe were scaled and ceremonial, driven by protocol and pride. The Corwins, in contrast, were fluid-bodied, expressive, always in motion, driven by intuition. Their languages were incompatible. Their histories were contradictory. They met now only because their mutual hatred had bankrupted them both. Serena entered the chamber, knowing she wouldn't be heard by words alone. The Growlithe emissary towered before her, his armor adorned with polished bone and shimmering blue stones. His thoughts rang like bells, loud, repetitive, ceremonial. He despised the Corwin's impulsiveness, their disregard for tradition, but beneath that loomed something deeper: betrayal, a broken pact, an act of mercy mistaken for weakness. She turned to a Corwin diplomat, who pulsed with ever-shifting color, speaking through a frequency translator. Their thoughts were quicksilver, regret shadowed by urgency, a desperate need to move forward without the burden of blame. Serena didn't speak. She closed her eyes. She let the room flood through her, and with it came the echo of a forgotten moment. Two leaders, long dead now, one attempting peace on a war-torn moon. One offered a sacred stone. The other misunderstood it as a declaration of dominance. That single error, unnoticed and uncorrected, had unraveled generations. When she opened her eyes, they both stared at her. "You remember the stone," she said softly. "You both do." Neither had spoken of it. No record of the incident remained. But she felt in their grief, buried beneath anger and protocol. That day, no treaties were signed, but neither side walked out. For the first time in 100 years, they sat in silence, not avoidance but recognition. Afterward, Alo found her alone in the observation chamber, her body limp from the strain. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was comfort enough. Later, she began to train with the Unity Cadre, an elite diplomatic corps responsible for navigating the complex emotional topography of interstellar relations. She met others who used tools, neural threads, empathic tech, chemical dampeners, but none could match her instinct. What came to them through machines came to her like breath. Not everyone welcomed her. Some feared her ability to uncover hidden motives. Others accused her of manipulation. A few envoys withdrew from negotiations entirely, unwilling to be read by a human. And yet the tide shifted. Species once hostile began to request her by name, not for what she said, but for how she made them feel seen. Among those who stayed close was a curious trio of aliens, small, slender beings with elongated limbs and quick laughter. They had no official names, only sounds and dances. But they followed her like mischievous spirits, mimicking her gait, braiding her hair with glowing thread, chirping softly when she was sad. She called them the Teliari, and though they communicated mostly through movement and touch, she understood them easily. They lived with joy, felt with abandon, and reminded her that not every emotion had to be a burden. Still, the weight of peace was never light. One night, in a quiet chamber of reflective glass, Serena admitted her fear to Alo. "What if I'm just a crutch?" she asked. "What happens when I'm not enough?" Alo turned, his dark eyes holding galaxies. "Then someone else will rise. But your presence has shifted the axis. Even if peace fails, the attempt matters now in a way it never did before." She nodded, though doubt lingered. She had always understood others. It was herself she struggled to see. Weeks later, during a routine transit through neutral space, their ship received a distress signal. A settlement on the floating world of Lyran. 5 had fallen into disarray. Once a haven for refugees and diplomats, the city was now collapsing under mysterious emotional unrest. Communications were distorted. Several species reported sudden violent outbursts, people turning on each other without warning. Serena was asked to go, not because she was immune to the madness, but because she might understand its source. As she prepared to descend into clouds, the Teliari clung to her legs, humming nervously. Alo stood beside her, silent, but his thoughts buzzed in her chest like static. She wasn't sure what she would find, but as the shuttle peeled away from the station, dipping into the storm-veiled sky, she felt again that old, familiar ache in her ribs, the feeling of too much. This time, she didn't resist it. Below, a city in crisis awaited, and within it, a truth buried in the chaos. The descent into Lyran, 5 felt like sinking through memory. The clouds were dense and bruised with static, a churning miasma that pressed against the shuttle's hull like breath. The floating city emerged slowly, suspended on vast anti-grav anchors that flickered ominously, their rhythm disrupted. From above, the settlement resembled a shattered halo. Fragments of platforms and spiraling towers connected by translucent bridges, many now dark or broken. Serena stepped into the airlock, her breath steady but shallow. As the doors hissed open, the wave hit her, not heat or pressure, but an onslaught of unfiltered emotion, raw and discordant. It wasn't just grief or fear. It was confusion weaponized into rage, sorrow that had festered into paranoia. The station's atmosphere, designed to accommodate dozens of species, had turned itself into a cage of psychic noise. Alo followed, his posture taut, though his features remained unreadable. The Teliari, typically playful and light, huddled together in silence, their bodies dim. The city was nearly abandoned. A few guards remained near the docking bay, but their expressions were vacant, eyes rimmed with red. Serena touched one gently, only to recoil as a vision slammed into her. His mate gone, not missing forgotten, her name vanished from his mind like smoke and wind. "That's not grief," she whispered. "It's erasure." Alo's gaze narrowed. Something here is feeding, not just on emotion, on memory. They moved inward, step by careful step, navigating past collapsed signs and messages scratched into the walls in a dozen languages. "We are losing ourselves. Don't forget what you love. Anchor to what is true." At the heart of the city stood the Empathium, a nexus designed to amplify emotional signals for therapeutic diplomacy. Serena had studied its mechanics, a neural resonance chamber capable of creating shared emotional fields, meant to foster radical empathy between species with no verbal overlap. But someone or something had hijacked its function. Inside, the air shimmered. The chamber pulsed faintly, and in its center stood a figure unlike any Serena had ever seen. It was not humanoid. Its form shifted continuously, feathers to miss a jagged stone, its presence more idea than body. "Stop," it said, though the voice did not carry sound. It existed in her mind, not as a command, but a question layered in pain. "What are you?" Serena asked, steadying herself against a rising flood of foreign sensations. I am remnants, it replied. A fragment, once memory, now hunger. The creature had not been created. It had been born in the empatheum, a byproduct of unresolved trauma magnified across centuries of failed negotiations and suppressed emotions. It had no identity of its own, only the remnants of others. I didn't know I was alive, it said, until you came. Serena felt its ache, existence without shape, empathy without anchor. It was a mirror to her own life before she learned to wield her gift. But unlike her, Remnants had grown in isolation, devouring emotions to understand itself, erasing names to fill its hollowness. You're killing them, she said gently. You're feeding, but you don't have to. I must, or I vanish. They forget me. I forget myself. You exist, Serena whispered, taking a step closer. I see you. I feel you. Remnants paused. Its form stuttered, flickering between spectral and solid, rain and ash. You remember me? She nodded. That was all it needed. The chamber trembled. The storm outside intensified, lightning cracking along the spires. But inside, a hush fell. Serena stepped forward and reached out. Not physically, but with a part of her that had always listened. She offered herself, not as prey, but as witness. Memories poured in, lives lost in war, treaties shattered, joys never shared. All the unspoken things left behind in diplomatic halls and battlefield graves. She absorbed them, not to carry, but to acknowledge. Behind her, Alo placed a hand on her back, steadying her. The Teliari began to hum, their frequency grounding her like a lullaby through a storm. Remnants wept, not tears, but energy, light and shadow pouring from its shifting body, collecting the air as crystalline fragments. Then, slowly it dispersed, not vanishing but diffusing into the chamber, into the station, into the sky. Not erased, remembered. Silence returned. The psychic fog lifted. Outside, voices began to stir. Recognition returned to the eyes of the few survivors. The madness receded like a bad dream. Serena collapsed to her knees, breath ragged but clear. You did it, Alo said quietly. No, she replied. We did. I just listened. In the following days, Lyran 5 began to heal. The empatheum was shut down, repurposed into a sanctuary for diplomats recovering from empathic trauma. The memory of remnants remained, not as a threat, but as a warning, that even the best intentions, when buried, could give rise to something dangerous. Serena was changed. Her mind, stretched beyond known limits, now held impressions she couldn't quite shake. She felt timelines fracture when she slept. She dreamed in languages not yet spoken, but she was no longer alone in those dreams. Peace, she understood now, was not a static state. It was a negotiation of truths, a continuous act of remembering each other in the face of forgetting. And somewhere in the stars beyond reach, other presences stirred, watching, waiting, perhaps even hoping that someone like her might come again. For Serena, the journey had only just begun.